Dakota Territory, 1879. The last traces of winter lingered stubbornly in the shadows as Nora Evans stood on the porch of her father's general store, searching the horizon where the endless prairie met the vast blue sky. Her fingers nervously twisted the calico fabric of her pale blue dress as she swept a stray lock of honey-blonde hair behind her ear. At 20 years old, Nora had spent 3 springs waiting like this, scanning for that familiar silhouette that made her heart race. The cattle drives don't usually come through until mid-May, her father reminded gently from behind the counter, arranging tins of coffee and tobacco. Owen might not arrive for weeks yet. I know, Pa, she replied, though she continued her vigil. 3 years ago, Owen Ingram had ridden into Cottonwood Springs with a cattle outfit headed north to Montana. Tall and lean with eyes the color of summer storms, he'd been different from the other cowboys, gentler somehow, despite the calluses on his hands and the quiet confidence in his stance. At 23, he carried himself like a man who had already seen enough of life to know its value. Nora believed the frontier was no place for lasting happiness. She'd watched too many women wither away from loneliness as their husbands chased fortune in the gold fields or followed the open range, returning broken or not at all. Her own mother had died of fever when Nora was 12, leaving her father grief-stricken and Nora convinced that attachment only led to heartbreak. The West took more than it gave. This was the truth she'd built her life around. Yet Owen's first smile had cracked something in that certainty. Miss Evans, he'd said that first day, hat in hand at the counter. I hear you make the finest apple pies west of the Missouri. She could still remember how his presence had filled the small store, how he'd smelled of leather and open air. People exaggerate, Mr. Ingram, she'd replied, trying to mask the sudden flutter in her chest. I am to judge for myself, if you'd be so kind. That spring, he'd lingered in Cottonwood Springs longer than his outfit, finding odd jobs around town. They'd shared conversations over fence repairs and store deliveries. When he finally rode out with promises to return the following season, Nora had told herself not to believe him. Cowboys were like tumbleweeds, never staying in one place for long. But Owen Ingram had defied expectation. The next spring, he'd returned, this time with a position as trail boss for a smaller outfit. And again the year after that. Each visit stretched longer, each farewell more difficult. With every return, he chipped away at her conviction that love and the frontier couldn't coexist. Now, as April breathed life back into the plains, Nora watched and waited, wondering if this year would be different or if her heart would once again learn the lesson of temporary joy followed by inevitable loneliness. 3 weeks later, a distant dust cloud on the horizon announced the approach of riders. Nora was hauling water from the well when Mrs. Abernathy called out the news from her porch across the street. Riders coming, Nora. Might be that handsome trail boss of yours. Nora set down her bucket, pulse quickening. She shaded her eyes against the morning sun, counting the approaching figures, 6 riders and what looked like a small herd. Though she tried to temper her hope, her feet carried her swiftly back to the store. By midday, the first cowboys trotted into town, leading a modest herd of cattle to the holding pens at the edge of Cottonwood Springs. Nora busied herself with inventory, pretending her every sense wasn't attuned to the sounds outside. The jingle of spurs, men's voices calling instructions, the town coming alive with the season's first drive. When the bell above the door jingled, she was facing the shelves, reorganizing canned peaches that needed no attention. Miss Evans. The voice, that voice, made her freeze momentarily before she turned. Owen stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, trail dust covering his clothes, but somehow making his gray eyes seem even clearer. At 26, his face had grown more weathered from seasons under the open sky, but his smile remained the same, slightly crooked, genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. His dark brown hair curled at his collar, and despite his trail-worn appearance, he'd clearly made an effort to clean up before coming to see her. Mr. Ingram, she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. You've returned. As promised. He stepped further into the store, boots scuffing the wooden floor. Your father around? Delivering supplies to the Thompsons' place. Won't be back till evening. Something flashed in Owen's eyes. Relief, perhaps? He moved closer, stopping at a respectful distance that somehow felt both proper and unbearable. The drive went smoothly, he offered. We'll be staying a spell. Got a contract with the army at Fort Meade. That's good news. She hesitated, then added more honestly, I'm glad. A customer entered, and Nora reluctantly turned her attention to Mrs. Peterson's order for flour and sugar. When the elderly woman left, Owen was examining a display of pocket knives, turning one over in his calloused hands. I was hoping, he said without looking up, that you might accompany me to the social on Saturday, if you're not otherwise engaged. The town's spring social, dancing and food in the newly constructed town hall. Nora had attended every year with her father or friends, never with a suitor. To accept Owen's invitation would signal something to the town, something she wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. She began, then faltered when he finally looked up, his expression so earnest it nearly undid her. Yes, Mr. Ingram. I would like that. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie. Owen, he corrected gently. After 3 years, I reckon we might use our given names, Nora. The sound of her name on his lips sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine streaming through the windows. The social arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of new grass and wildflowers. Nora had spent the afternoon preparing, washing her hair until it shone and pressing her best dress, sage green with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. She'd even borrowed Mrs. Abernathy's rose-scented water, dabbing it lightly at her wrists and neck. You look beautiful, her father said, his eyes crinkling with affection when she descended the stairs. Your mother would be proud to see the woman you've become. The mention of her mother brought a bittersweet pang. Do you think she would approve? Of Owen, I mean. Samuel Evans' expression softened. She would want your happiness, Nora. Nothing more, nothing less. When Owen arrived, he wore a clean white shirt under a dark vest, his usual trail clothes replaced with his Sunday best. He'd trimmed his hair and shaved clean, making him look younger, almost boyish in his evident nervousness. You're a vision, Nora, he said simply, his voice rough with sincerity. The walk to the town hall was filled with the kind of comfortable conversation that had grown between them over their scattered time together. Talk of books she'd read during the winter, tales of the trail that made her laugh, observations about the town's growth. With each step, Nora felt the armor around her heart loosening further. Inside the hall, lanterns cast a golden glow over tables laden with food and a cleared space for dancing. Neighbors greeted them with knowing smiles that made Nora blush. When the fiddler struck up a lively reel, Owen led her to the floor. I should warn you, he said, taking her hand. Cowboys aren't known for their graceful dancing. But his arm around her waist was sure as he guided her through the steps, and Nora found herself laughing breathlessly as they turned and moved together. For someone who claimed no skill, he managed well enough, his eyes never leaving her face. During a break in the music, they stepped outside for air. The night was cool and star-filled, the sounds of music and laughter muffled behind them. I've thought about this moment all winter, Owen admitted, his voice low. About seeing you again. Nora looked up at him, at the face that had occupied her dreams for 3 years. I told myself not to wait for you, that it was foolish to count on a cowboy's promise. Yet you did wait. His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. I did, she whispered, the admission both terrifying and freeing. Nora, there's something I need to. A shout from inside interrupted whatever he had been about to say. They turned to see a commotion at the entrance, men gathering with concerned expressions. Fire, someone called out. Fire at the livery stable. The peaceful evening shattered. Owen's hand tightened on hers briefly before he released her. Stay here, he urged, already moving toward the gathering crowd. But Nora Evans was not one to stand idle in a crisis. She followed, arriving at the stable to find flames licking up the wooden walls, horses whinnying and panic inside. The volunteer fire brigade was forming a bucket line from the town well, but the blaze was growing quickly. Without hesitation, Owen and several other men rushed into the building to free the trapped animals. Nora joined the bucket line, passing water along with everyone else who could lend a hand. The heat was intense, sparks flying into the night sky as the roof began to catch. Moments stretched into eternity as men emerged with frightened horses, some singed but alive. When the last animal was led to safety, Nora searched the crowd for Owen's familiar figure. Terror gripped her when she couldn't locate him. Owen, she called, moving closer to the burning building. Sheriff Taylor caught her arm. Miss Evans, it's too dangerous. But Owen, as if summoned by her fear, a figure emerged from the smoke-filled doorway, half carrying another man. It was Owen, supporting Mr. Peterson's grandson, a young stable hand who must have been trapped inside. Both were coughing violently, faces blackened with soot. Relief swept through Nora so powerfully her knees nearly buckled. She rushed forward as Owen lowered the young man to the ground where Doc Wilson could attend to him. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Owen, heedless of the soot that would ruin her dress. "You could have been killed," she whispered fiercely against his chest. His arms came around her, strong and certain. "But I wasn't," he replied simply, his voice hoarse from smoke. "I'm right here." In that moment, with the chaos of the fire and the community rallying to fight it, Nora confronted the truth she'd been avoiding. The pain of possible loss was the price of love, but a life without that love was no life at all. By morning, the stable was a smoldering ruin, but no lives had been lost, human or animal. The town gathered to begin clearing debris, everyone pitching in as they always did when hardship struck. Nora brought coffee and biscuits to the workers, searching for Owen among them. She found him helping to sort salvageable lumber, his movements betraying exhaustion beneath his usual strength. "You should rest," she said, offering him a steaming cup. "You inhaled a lot of smoke last night. There's work to be done." But he accepted the coffee gratefully, his fingers brushing hers. "I wanted to apologize about the social. Not exactly the evening I had planned." She smiled. "I don't know. It seems rather fitting for us." Brief moments of peace interrupted by frontier chaos. His laugh turned into a cough, and concern shadowed her face again. "At least sit for a moment," she insisted, gesturing to a crate nearby. He complied, watching her over the rim of his cup. "You know, when I was in that burning building, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not just last night, but every time I ride away. Coming back to you has become the point of everything else." Her breath caught. Before she could respond, Sheriff Taylor approached, his expression grave. "Ingram, got a word?" he asked, nodding respectfully to Nora. Owen stood, exchanging a look with her that promised they would continue later. Nora returned to distributing food, but kept an eye on the intense conversation between Owen and the sheriff. Whatever they discussed left Owen looking troubled, his shoulders tense as he returned to work. That evening, as Nora was closing the store, the bell jangled and Owen entered, cleaned up but still bearing a small cut above his eyebrow from the night before. "Sheriff thinks the fire wasn't an accident," he said without preamble. "Found evidence it was deliberately set." Nora set down the ledger she'd been tallying. Who would do such a thing? Owen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as discomfort. "That's what I need to talk to you about. Remember how I was going to tell you something at the social? Before the fire?" She nodded, suddenly apprehensive. "The reason I only come through once a year isn't just because of the cattle drives." He took a deep breath. "For the past 3 years, I've been working with the territorial marshals. Undercover, tracking a gang that's been rustling cattle and worse across the Dakota Territory." Nora stared at him, trying to process this revelation. "You're a lawman?" "Not officially. I was recruited after I helped catch a rustler my first season on the trail. The marshals needed someone who could move with the cattle outfits without raising suspicion." His gray eyes held hers steadily. "I've been building a case against the Harlow gang. They've been operating out of the Black Hills, but I've tracked connections to Cottonwood Springs." "And the fire?" "A warning, the sheriff thinks. Someone may have recognized me from a previous encounter. Or they're suspicious of why the same trail boss returns to this small town year after year." His expression darkened. "I've put you in danger, Nora. I never meant to. But by coming back to see you, I've created a pattern that's noticeable." The implications settled over her. Not just that Owen had been living a dangerous double life, but that his feelings for her had potentially compromised his safety and his mission. "Why tell me this now?" she asked quietly. "Because tomorrow I'm riding out with the sheriff and a few deputies to meet the marshals. We're going to arrest the Harlow brothers and their associates." He moved closer, taking her hands in his. "And because if anything happens to me, I couldn't bear the thought of you not knowing the truth. Of you thinking I'd just abandoned you like so many others have abandoned those they claim to care for out here." Fear and something else, perhaps pride, warred within her. "How dangerous will it be?" The Harlows won't come quietly. His thumbs traced circles on her knuckles. But this has to end, Nora. For 3 years, I've lived for these brief weeks with you, all while knowing I was hiding part of who I am. I'm tired of the deception, tired of riding away, tired of waiting for next spring. She searched his face. This man she thought she knew, now revealed as someone carrying far more responsibility than she'd imagined. What happens after? If you succeed, a smile touched his lips, though his eyes remained serious. That's what I wanted to ask you at the social. The marshals have offered me a permanent position. I could be stationed here in Cottonwood Springs. No more riding away, no more waiting. Hope flared bright and dangerous in her chest. You'd stay? Here, only if I have reason to. His gaze was intent, questioning. Before she could respond, hoofbeats sounded outside, fast and urgent. The door burst open and Sheriff Taylor stood there, breathing hard. Ingram, we've got trouble. Harlow's men, they know we're coming. They've taken hostages at the saloon. Owen's expression hardened instantly. He squeezed Nora's hands once before releasing them. How many? At least 5 gunmen. They've got the bartender, Miss Lucy who plays piano, and 3 others. They're demanding safe passage out of the territory. Owen was already checking his revolver. And if they don't get it? The sheriff's grim look was answer enough. Nora, stay here, Owen said, his voice taking on a command she'd never heard before. Lock the door behind us. Owen. She caught his sleeve as he turned to leave. For just a moment, his determined expression softened. He cupped her face with one hand, his touch infinitely gentle despite the urgency of the moment. I'll come back to you. That's a promise I intend to keep. Then he was gone, following the sheriff into the gathering darkness, leaving Nora with revelations that changed everything she thought she knew about the man she'd been waiting for all these years. The night stretched endlessly, the town gripped by tense silence broken only by occasional shouts from the direction of the saloon. Nora paced the store, unable to sit, unable to do anything but listen and wait. Her father had returned from his delivery route to find the town in crisis, and now sat with a shotgun across his lap near the door. You should try to sleep, daughter, he said gently as midnight approached. I can't, Pa. She twisted her hands together. Not while. Samuel Evans studied his daughter's face. You love him, don't you? This cowboy who turns out to be something more. Nora stopped pacing, the truth settling over her like a mantle. Yes, she whispered. I do. Her father nodded, unsurprised. Then have faith in him. Men like Owen Ingram don't make promises lightly. A sudden volley of gunshots shattered the night. Nora rushed to the window, heart in her throat, as more shots followed. Within moments, people were running toward the saloon, calls for the doctor rising above the confusion. Stay here, her father ordered, rising with his shotgun. But this time, Nora couldn't obey. I can help, she insisted, already gathering bandages and the medicinal whiskey they kept for emergencies. Outside, the night had erupted into chaos. Lanterns bobbed as people hurried toward the saloon, where smoke drifted from broken windows. Nora pushed through the gathering crowd, searching desperately for any sign of Owen. The scene inside the saloon was one of devastation. Overturned tables, shattered glass, the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging heavy in the air. Doc Wilson was already kneeling beside a wounded man, while others were helping the hostages who appeared shaken but largely unharmed. Sheriff Taylor stood near the bar, blood seeping from a graze on his arm, but otherwise intact. When he saw Nora, his expression told her everything she feared. Where is he? She demanded, her voice surprisingly steady. They took him, Miss Evans. 2 of Harlow's men escaped out the back with Owen as their shield. He'd been shot already, tried to protect Lucy when one of them threatened her. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Which way? Miss Evans, there's nothing you can do. I've sent riders to alert the marshals, but which way? She repeated, a steel in her voice that surprised even her. The sheriff sighed, recognizing determination when he saw it. East, toward the creek. But they're armed and desperate. No one should follow alone. Nora was already moving, her mind clearer than it had ever been. 3 springs she had waited passively, accepting whatever fate delivered to her doorstep. She would not wait this time. At the livery stable, or what remained of it, several horses had been moved to temporary corrals. She found her father's gentle mare, the one he'd taught her to ride on years ago. Without saddle or proper bridle, Using only a rope halter, she mounted and urged the horse eastward, toward the creek that carved through the prairie 5 miles from town. The night was clear, stars offering just enough light to follow the trail. Fear and determination drove her forward, the steady rhythm of hooves beneath her like a heartbeat. She had no plan, no weapon beyond a small knife tucked in her boot, no idea what she would find. But the alternative, waiting helplessly while Owen bled in the hands of desperate men, was unthinkable. She slowed as she approached the creek, the sound of water growing louder. Careful now, she dismounted and secured her horse to a tree, approaching on foot. Ahead, a faint glow of firelight flickered among the trees that lined the waterway. Crouching low, Nora crept closer until voices became distinguishable. "He ain't gonna make it till morning," one man was saying. "Bleeding too much." "Don't matter," another replied. "He's our ticket past the territorial border. Dead or alive, the marshals won't risk shooting if we've got one of their own." Peering around a tree trunk, Nora could make out 2 men huddled near a small fire. And there, propped against a fallen log, was Owen. Even in the dim light, she could see the dark stain spreading across his shirt, his head lolled to one side, as if unconscious or... No, she wouldn't consider that possibility. One of the men stood, moving toward Owen with a canteen. "Hey, lawman, drink something if you want to live long enough to see morning." When Owen didn't respond, the man kicked his boot roughly. "Hey." Owen's head lifted slightly. "Go to hell," he managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. The man laughed. "You'll be there before us at this rate." Nora's mind raced. 2 armed men against 1 unarmed woman. Impossible odds. But as she watched them settle back by the fire, an idea formed. Moving silently back to her horse, she retrieved the coil of rope she always kept with her saddle. Then, circling wide around the camp, she approached from the opposite direction, where the creek gurgled over rocks. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared they would hear it as she crept to the water's edge. Taking a deep breath, she threw a large stone far downstream, where it landed with a satisfying splash. What was that? One of the men was instantly alert, gun drawn. "Probably just a deer," his companion said, but he too stood, peering into the darkness. "Check it out," the first man ordered. "I'll watch our prize." The second man nodded, moving cautiously along the creek bank toward the sound. As soon as he was out of sight, Nora threw another stone, this time into the brush behind the remaining captor. He whirled, firing a shot into the darkness. "Who's there? Show yourself." In his moment of distraction, Nora darted from her hiding place, the knife from her boot now in her hand. Not to attack, she was no fighter, but to reach Owen, who had lifted his head at the commotion. His eyes widened when he saw her, a mixture of disbelief and horror crossing his face. "Behind you," he managed to call out, his voice stronger than before. Nora ducked just as the man turned, his gun swinging wildly in her direction. She slashed with her knife, not at him, but at the rope binding Owen's hands. It gave way partially, enough for him to wrench one hand free. A shot rang out, splintering bark next to her head. The man leveled his gun for another try, but before he could fire, Owen lunged forward despite his wound, tackling him at the knees. Both men went down hard, struggling for control of the weapon. "Run!" Owen shouted to her, his face contorted with effort as he grappled with his captor. Instead, Nora grabbed a branch from near the fire, swinging it with all her strength at the outlaw's head. It connected with a sickening crack, and the man went limp beneath Owen. Breathing hard, Owen looked up at her with a mixture of amazement and fear. The other one, as if on cue, crashing footsteps announced the return of the second man. Without thinking, Nora grabbed the fallen outlaw's gun, pointing it with shaking hands toward the sound. The second kidnapper emerged from the trees, his own weapon raised, only to find himself facing not only Nora's trembling aim but Owen, who had managed to rise to one knee, now holding a knife with deadly intent despite the blood soaking his shirt. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the distant sound of hoofbeats broke the standoff. The outlaw's eyes darted toward the sound, calculating his odds. "Drop it," Owen said, his voice weak but unwavering. "The marshals are coming. There's nowhere to run." Whether it was the approaching riders or the determination in both their faces, the man slowly lowered his weapon. "Kick it away," Nora ordered, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. He complied, and she quickly retrieved it, keeping both guns trained on him as Owen secured his hands with the remainder of the rope. By the time Sheriff Taylor and the deputies arrived, followed closely by the territorial marshals, Nora was kneeling beside Owen, pressing a makeshift bandage to his bleeding shoulder. "You're the most foolish, brave woman I've ever known," Owen whispered, his face pale but his eyes clear as they held hers. "You could have been killed. So could you." She smoothed his hair back from his forehead. "And I decided I wasn't willing to spend another spring waiting, only to find you didn't return." A faint smile touched his lips. "I made a promise, remember?" As the marshals took charge of the prisoners and the doctor hurried to tend to Owen's wound, Nora stayed by his side, her hand clasped firmly in his uninjured one. The false belief that had guided her life, that love had no place in the harshness of the frontier, lay shattered around her, replaced by the undeniable truth that love was perhaps the only thing strong enough to survive it. Spring blossomed fully across the Dakota Territory, painting the prairie with wildflowers and new grass. 6 weeks after the confrontation at the creek, Cottonwood Springs had returned to its peaceful routine. The Harlow gang had been disbanded, its members awaiting trial in Yankton, and the burned livery stable was rising anew under the community's collective efforts. Nora stood on the porch of the general store as she had so many times before, but this time without the anxious scanning of the horizon. Instead, her gaze was fixed on the man approaching from the newly rebuilt stable, his gait still slightly favored on one side as he recovered from his wound. Owen's smile brightened as he caught sight of her waiting. In the weeks of his recovery, he had stayed in town, accepting a permanent position as deputy marshal for the territory with Cottonwood Springs as his base. No more long absences, no more waiting for spring. "Beautiful day," he remarked as he reached her, tipping his hat with a playfulness that made her smile. "Indeed it is," she agreed, noting how the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair. His lean frame had filled out somewhat during his convalescence, thanks in large part to her insistence on proper meals. "I thought we might take that ride I promised you, now that Doc Wilson has finally cleared me for such activities." He offered his arm. "If you're amenable, Miss Evans." "I believe I could be persuaded, Deputy Marshal Ingram." They walked to where 2 horses waited, saddled and ready. Owen helped her mount with hands that lingered perhaps longer than strictly necessary. Soon they were riding side by side along the creek, the same one that had been the scene of such danger now transformed into a peaceful backdrop for their outing. "I never properly thank you," Owen said as they let the horses drink from the clear water. "For saving my life that night." Nora shook her head. "I think we saved each other." He dismounted, then reached up to help her down. As her feet touched the ground, his hands remained at her waist, steady and warm. "I had plans, you know," he said softly, "before everything went sideways. I had this whole speech prepared for the social." "Did you?" She looked up at him, at the face that had become as essential to her as breath. 3 years I've been coming back to you, Nora Evans. 3 years of carrying something with me on the trail." He reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing a small cloth-wrapped object. "I've had this since last autumn. Bought it in Cheyenne with the money I'd saved." Her heart began to race as he unwrapped the cloth, revealing a simple gold band with a small pearl set into its center. "I know I'm not the most conventional suitor," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Got more scars than most, inside and out. But I love you with everything I am. You've been my North Star, the reason to keep fighting, the home I return to no matter how far I roam." He took a deep breath. "Nora Evans, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked from the ring to his earnest face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Owen Ingram. I will marry you." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the prairie as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then his arms were around her, lifting her off her feet in an embrace that spoke of all the years of waiting, all the danger overcome, all the love that had grown between a store owner's daughter and a cowboy who turned out to be so much more. When he set her down, his lips found hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. The prairie stretched endless around them, no longer a barrier to happiness, but the very foundation of the life they would build together. "No more waiting for spring," he murmured against her hair. "No," she agreed, her heart fuller than she had ever imagined possible. "Now we make all the seasons our own." As they rode back toward town, the setting sun gilding the grasslands in gold. Nora felt the weight of the ring on her finger, tangible proof that love could not only survive the harshness of the frontier, but transform it into something beautiful and enduring. The false belief that had guided her for so long had given way to a greater truth, that in finding each other, they had found the courage to face whatever the West might bring, together.